My name's Lilly Miller. I'm the Chief Financial Officer here at the PlanetMark, and I'm delighted to be joining you from our carbon battle bus. We're at the very beginning of phase 2 of our Zero Carbon Tour, which started back in June and visited G7, along with lots of other businesses, as you've just seen. With thanks to the Institute of Directors and our other wonderful partners, we will be travelling throughout the UK to COP26 in November. The PlanetMark will be meeting hundreds of businesses over these 12 weeks, helping to tell stories that empower, educate, raise awareness, and support businesses to make their zero carbon pledges and commitments. When I was asked to speak today, I spent some time thinking about what it means to be a good leader and what that means to me. For me, a strong leader is somebody who focuses on people, who guides, supports and inspires their team. And this should include addressing sustainability in all its forms, from climate, which I'll discuss further in a moment, to social sustainability. Ensuring you have a business that celebrates diversity and promotes equity, where people feel they belong. Humans are generally driven by their desire to do good, and no matter your sector or specialism, embedding sustainability into your business gives people a sense of purpose that unites them. It's also any leader's chance to really make a difference and make their mark on the companies they work within. There is so much work to do to tackle climate change. There's no denying the science or that collective action is needed. What we often find at the PlanetMark is people aren't quite sure where to begin or perhaps what they should do. One thing I do know is that we cannot let our desire for perfection stop us making progress now. There is no silver bullet when it comes to tackling the climate crisis. We know there is so much to be done, but there's lots and lots that we can do to make progress right now, and we must. One thing I do know is that every organisation will have employees that care. At the PlanetMark, we often refer to unlocking the passion within an organisation. The challenge can seem daunting, so just get the conversation started and take one step at a time. I've seen time and time again the business benefits in making sustainable decisions, from competitive advantage and cost saving to staff attraction and retention. There really is no better time. Something I'm personally passionate about is the role in which CFOs and finance directors can have in the transition to net zero and in driving sustainability within their businesses. The role of a traditional CFO is in the past. The silos are being broken down, and like it or not, we are all sustainability directors now. A CFO's main responsibilities are around revenue generated, cost savings, and risk reduction. And the risks associated with climate change are huge. Of the top 10 business risks highlighted by the World Economic Forum, 6 of them are climate related. There is no denying the impact that climate change will have on your business. I believe the key is using sustainability as your business superpower, your USP, to improve and future-proof your businesses. And this is something hundreds of our members have been doing for many years, and they are reaping the benefits. CFOs can be at the forefront of sustainable decisions and should be bringing these ideas into the boardroom. Financial performance is no longer enough. We must be linking performance to social and environmental impacts. I'm sure you'll all agree that last month's IPCC report was sobering. Amongst the many warnings around sea level rises, extreme weather and plastics was a telling statistic. 86% of man-made emissions is still due to the burning of fossil fuels. So this is a really easy place to begin. Is your business doing simple things like purchasing renewable energy or making larger investments into sustainability, such as electric vehicles for your fleet or solar power for your buildings? It is expected that the costs of energy and water will rise considerably over the coming years. Investing in energy efficiency measures and the generation of your own power now is not only good for the planet, but it mitigates the risks of those costs rising in the future. As finance professionals, we hold the purse strings and we have a huge influence over the companies that we work with. There are many areas that we can challenge. In fact, so many of the strategic sustainability decisions that businesses make actually link back to finance. Accurate data and measurement is at the core of both finance and sustainability. We cannot manage what isn't measured, and carbon footprint measurement would always be my first recommendation as a starting point for any business. Once you have this, you have a baseline for which you can improve upon, and you have accurate information to help you make good business decisions. I'd question, is sustainability included in your business strategy and in your budget? Where do you need help? Knowledge sharing is so important, and you really don't need to do this on your own, and you don't need all the answers to begin. Supply chains is another key area that CFOs have great influence over. This is where your Scope 3 emissions lie, and for some businesses, this can account for 90% of their carbon footprint. We should be asking questions of our suppliers. Do they share our values? Do they measure and reduce their own carbon footprint? Do they have equitable and ethical principles? Will they come with you on your journey? I'm so lucky to see many businesses collaborating together within our PlanetMark community, all with a common goal and working together to achieve it. I think we can all agree that legislation is too slow, but we will, without a doubt, see increasing legislation around businesses and climate change going forward. Funding is now dependent on your ESG credentials, and last year, the UK saw the introduction of the Streamlined Energy and Carbon Reporting Framework, something we lovingly refer to as SECA. This is the first annual piece of carbon-focused legislation to shine a light beyond listed companies. SECA makes it mandatory for large businesses to disclose their carbon footprint, along with the measures taken to reduce it, at Companies House with their statutory accounts. And whilst this isn't perfect, and legislation needs to reach small and medium-sized businesses and importantly require a reduction, it is a starting point. Going forward, I think we'll see an increased noise around ESG, net zero, and the associated commitments. And for many businesses, this will require improved disclosure and transparency. Any forward-thinking and ambitious leader should be taking preemptive action now, rather than waiting until their hand is forced. I'll leave you with two takeaways: transparency and action. Both are vital. It seems easier than ever for businesses to greenwash behind confusing and conflicting terms. Climate positive, carbon positive, zero carbon, net zero. What do they all mean? What's the difference? Did you know that only 20% of net zero commitments globally actually meet the minimum criteria for robustness that's been set out by the UN's Race for Zero? This is absolutely not acceptable. The Zero Carbon Tour's aim is to simplify, educate and answer these questions. The PlanetMark will be holding workshops, both in person and online, throughout the tour, and we'll be helping businesses to get the conversation started, make their pledges and commitments, and go to net zero. To sign up and to get involved, please visit zerocarbontour.com and do follow our journey on social media. Thank you so much.
This conference has been curated so that we explore together not only why it is important for business to respond to the climate emergency, but how they, you and me, can make a difference, not alone, but in collaboration. I'm delighted today as we move into what does governance look like in this chapter that we have to go through now. And I'm delighted to be joined by Douglas Lamont, CEO of Innocent Drinks, as we discuss that theme of good governance and the role of the boards ensuring that words turn into action. Now, Douglas has been CEO at Innocent since 2013, having joined the company in 2006. As CEO, he's overseen a rapid expansion of the business into new markets in Europe, Asia, and new product ranges. I'm sure we have all tried them and enjoyed them. The business has more than doubled in size. The company is more than 500 million euros in turnover. Now, in parallel, Innocent's commitment to people and planet has been strengthened under his leadership. And it became a B Corporation in 2018, something that we'll explore, and committed to net zero by 2030 at the latest. It also commits to giving 10% of its profits to a charity, and it enables the Innocent Foundation that was set up to do groundbreaking work in the fight against severe and acute malnutrition around the globe. Douglas was also appointed co-chair of the Better Business Act, a coalition of more than 500 UK businesses in December 2020, campaigning for changes to company law that would see directors having clearer legal responsibility to balance their commitment to people and planet, as well as to shareholders. And I'm delighted to say that IoD signed up to that as well. So Douglas, a very warm welcome to you, and thank you for taking the time to spend with us.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure to be here.
I'll maybe kick off and just ask a question in terms of the opportunities and challenges that you've faced over the years of growing an international business while addressing these climate concerns.
So, in any context, business is challenging, and all the different priorities that you have. But I think in the sort of context that we have now, how sustainability and social justice and other elements come into the leadership and into the boardroom is critically important. I think as Innocent, we were incredibly lucky that the founders had a very clear vision, over 20 years ago, and set out a sort of purpose, vision, and values for the business that ultimately was our governance. And I still today describe our purpose, vision, and values as my job description. And so whilst, then how you manage all those different sort of, conflicts that exist within a business about what you focus on or what priorities you have, having that, if you like, North Star of our purpose, vision, and values has really helped manage through that. And as you get to these difficult decision points, using that to really help and guide your decision making, I think has been really powerful at Innocent. So, the starting points for governance for us is sort of not in lots of technical documents. It's in a very simple one pager that outlines our purpose, vision, and values.
And I'm interested also just in the history here as well, Douglas, because you've been on board since 2006. I mean, Innocent Drinks has grown from that start off being a small and quirky startup to a major international brand, but it's also owned now wholly by Coca-Cola. Have you noticed, any distinct difference, or have you been able to continue to drive that journey independently, as if Innocent was an independent company as opposed to a subsidiary?
So I think, just in terms of the growth point, I think because we've got a clear purpose, we've attracted a bunch of employees that really believe in what we're trying to achieve, which is ultimately how do you prove, and people call it different things, but sustainable capitalism works. How do you prove that balancing people, profit, and planet is not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do, because it drives growth and it drives good outcomes for everybody. And the fact that we've got a talented group of people that really believe in that means that those decisions and choices are made every day in the business that just drives that. So however big you are, if your employee base really believes in it and holds themselves to account on it, those changes are sort of built into the DNA of the company. In terms of our shareholder, they invested in our business because they believed in what we were doing, and they were incredibly supportive of our purpose, vision, and value, and likewise see that it's the smart thing to do for the long term. So have been very supportive of us in strengthening our purpose, vision, and values, increasing our investment, around sustainability, maintaining our commitment to 10% of profits to charity. All of those things have been strengthened under their ownership, because it's driving great, business outcomes as well in terms of the growth that you've talked about.
And it's an interesting thing, because I've heard many companies talk about responding to the climate crisis as an additional cost burden, and looking at that this is simply going to increase our overheads at a time when profits are under pressure. But you seem to have taken the opposite view of that this is something to seize, and something where you could effectively increase and create a sustainable business model for the future. Maybe talk a little bit about that kind of stress and strain.
Yeah, so I noticed in the headlines for this, people sometimes talk about it as a paradox of how do you do both. I just don't see it like that at all. I think I see it as a new paradigm. It's not just Innocent and a few interesting companies that are going to work like this. If we're going to steer the world to a fairer and more sustainable future, the new paradigm of the most important thing in the boardroom is that everyone on the board is thinking, how do I balance people, profit, and planet, for want of a shortcut? It is going to be, the governance that we all require over the next sort of 10 to 15 years. And again, partly because it's built into the way that we've always done things, it's just, we see it as positives. I think there's a really good example. We're building, just about to launch our, a big production facility in Rotterdam, which, we've designed to be the world's most sustainable factory. And whilst we went through that business case, we were looking at every single opportunity to make sure that it was net zero, to make sure that we were reducing water waste, we were reducing all forms of waste from the site, so that we could bring down the costs. Now, yes, that had more capital investment up front to achieve that, but the interesting thing is it materially improved the business case, because all the things that you were saving were quite near-term benefits. If you're reducing your energy by over 50%, those benefits are coming from day one. And so the capital return on those is higher. So I flip it on its head and say, I've got a better business case because I've gone into this with a sustainability mindset than I would have done if I'd sort of followed how it was done in the past. And, I think that there are loads of opportunities. And I think most companies have obviously clocked that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in terms of reduce, that saves you costs. The next step of, right, how do you start to take out more structural things, is where it gets harder. But for us, a combination of investing in breakthrough projects, half of which don't work, and some of which do. Right now, again, we're commissioning electric trucks that pull 50 tons, and no one in the world has done that, but we're trying, and we'll see. In the same way, back in 2004, we put recycled PET into our bottles, and it's 15 years later that it's now talked about as a mainstream topic of conversation. But experimenting, learning, as well as picking off the low-hanging fruit, is, I guess, the way that we've always worked, partly for ourselves, but also partly to show what's possible to others. And I don't see sustainability as a kind of point of difference or a competitive advantage. It has to be a team sport, and we're very committed to sharing all our learnings on all fronts about sustainability, because it's only if we all move that it makes a difference. Innocent being good on its own is nice, but frankly doesn't make a big difference to the challenge that we all face. So we all have to go on this journey, and a lot of it's mindset. It's like, just sort of, there's always an unknown. And I guess at Innocent, early on in the life of the company, we jumped over that unknown and went, oh yeah, we can build and operate and run a business like this quite successfully. So let's do that.
And I suppose it was maybe a natural progression as you continue to look at that, to look at becoming a B corporation as well. Tell me a little bit about the discussions that took place, at the boardroom level, as to the pros and cons, because it's still at this stage effectively a minority sport, but hopefully will increase.
So I think what we wanted was, obviously we'd built this reputation as and we're called Innocent. So by day one, you've put yourself on a pedestal. And whilst people had this kind of vague understanding of good, we kind of wanted to prove it. And when we looked around at, like, what's the standard that looks at all aspects of the company? We talk at Innocent about being good all round. So you're not taking one slither of the business that is good and press releasing that and say, look at us, ignore the other 90%, but look at this 10%. We really believe at Innocent you have to be good all round to be a good company. And when we looked around and say, well, what could sort of certify that, do that, B Corp was clearly the answer. Because it asks and audits fantastic questions throughout your business. So first of all, it felt like it would tick the box in terms of saying Innocent does what it says on the tin. Secondly, and far more powerfully, it was joining a movement of leaders that are incredibly like-minded to us. And we need to shout with a louder voice. And I felt, Innocent was shouting a little bit on its own. And with the B Corp movement, I feel like we've been able to amplify our voice and other voices to say, this is a great way to operate companies. whether it's this or other equivalents. I'm not, B Corp's great, but it's not the only game in town. Having a framework to think about how you do these things has been really important, and that's proved out in our business since we've become a B Corp. I think we're a much better business. We haven't just got all these sporadic initiatives coming. We've got a framework about how we think about them and how we decide about them. You've got a framework to sort of decide, how much are we investing around these sustainability initiatives or ideas versus how much we're investing in our people or in our local community. And B Corp just gives you that framework to organize and also have the discussion back in the business when you're saying no to something, because there's always more ideas than not, and you have to say no to stuff. So it's given us that framework, and it's also made me a braver leader. I think I make decisions far more clearly and quickly, sometimes because I've picked up the phone to another B Corp CEO and said, I noticed you implemented this type of paternity policy. We're thinking of doing the same. We're a bit worried. What did you see? And they go, yeah, we were worried too. We did it. It was fine. Go. All those kind of things are powerful. And then again, the net zero commitment for 2030 came about by 500 B Corps saying, should we all just commit to this and kind of prove it's fine? And again, we chivvy each other along to go faster. So it's been it sort of did a job on proving a little bit, but more importantly, it's given us a voice and a continuous improvement approach that I think is really powerful.
And one of the exciting things when I looked at your website, talked about the journey and the engagement of many people across the organization who became real evangelical about the aspects of that sustainability. How did you go about that while at the same time managing, I'll call it the board and governance, and making sure that the board was fully in favor of this as well?
I think that I don't know, maybe I'm lucky with the board that I have, but we've never really had that sort of tension of, I guess as a company, we've generally delivered on our promises to our shareholder. So, over sort of 3 years or 5 years, we've laid out, this is what we're going to achieve. And sort of financially, we've gone about and achieved that. At the same time, I've been able to commit the investment programs, and transformation programs around making Innocent a better company, strengthening it in many ways. In terms of the sort of bottom up stuff, again, having clear purpose, vision, and values attracts. If you recruit against your values, you attract a bunch of people that come with an innate belief in what you're trying to achieve. Secondly, if you put a framework like B Corp in place, where if you understand, it's a whole load of questions that you can give to each team, and they can use those to kind of assess their decision making. So as I said earlier, the sort of change comes from the bottom up because they've got a framework, a good understanding, and a passion, and you put that together, and all of a sudden, you actually I find my job on that front is sort of relatively easy, because people are coming to me with already quite well thought through, we think we should do this, and by the way, we've already thought about the framework, so yes, you should say yes, rather than just random ideas coming at you as a CEO, which you have to filter. So yeah, again, I think we're lucky that we've got a board that I have a shareholder who thinks long term and allows me to invest long term to build the right business at scale, but also with substance. So we talk a lot about scale and substance, and delivering those two pillars is what I've been fortunate enough to be able to have a context where I've been able to do that.
And so when you pull this together and you start thinking, climate responsibility is not just about the road to net zero, in terms of the phrases and a number of the sessions that we've already held at this conference, but also the practical reductions in, the use of water, plastics, and ensuring biodiversity as far as possible. Now, large corporates like yourself will always be open to controversy. I'm sure you've had your share of this, because environmental groups will and are increasingly calling companies out for greenwashing as opposed to really establishing actions. Now, I would say from everything I've read that you're the opposite of that. It's all action oriented, so that it's measurable and you can show just the progress that you're making. But you're still inevitably consuming plastics, etc. So what are you doing in practical terms, not just to address the issue for that environmental group who want that assurance, but also on this journey towards net zero, in terms of how do you make Innocent that truly sustainable business?
Yeah, so this is where it gets really hard, where you are as a leader, as a board, you're trying to balance multiple pillars. So in being good all round or looking after people, profit, and planet. Clearly, you've got to deliver for your shareholder, but you've got to do that in the right way, where you're looking after your employees, you're looking after throughout your supply chain, all the people that work in your supply chain but not directly for you, local communities, sustainability, and on each of those items, what we try and do at Innocent is set out and be very public and transparent about what our goals are to move forward on every single one of those pillars. And I think we've done a good job of setting ourselves a pretty high bar about how fast we're going to go on those and move towards them. And I think why consumers and generally, in industry, we're sort of trusted and respected is because it's like they don't set themselves a soft bar and they get on and do it and they can sort of show the evidence. The issue you get often, though, is against each one of those pillars, there will be a frustration with a particular group that has a focus on a particular topic that says, but Innocent, I'm just looking at that pillar, and why aren't you going 5 times faster? And you get pushback and attack, and you have to listen to that and say, are we not? But you then have to, as a board and as a CEO, step back and go, okay, but in the context of balancing 5 different pillars, and you're not looking at the other 4, am I doing a good enough job? Is Innocent really living up to its purpose, which is, our purpose is to help people and the planet live well and die old. So again, we've not set ourselves a low bar on our purpose. And so I have to judge against 4 or 5 pillars. I often get criticized on one pillar, you're not going fast enough. And ultimately, you have to take that criticism. You have to have a bit of a thick skin. You have to listen to it and say, yeah, actually, let's ask myself a question. But often I step back and go, no, but across multiple pillars, I believe that we are going pretty fast and doing a pretty good job, and can hold our head up high. Everybody can disagree with different elements of each choice you make, for sure, and that's going to be today's world. And if you really are being cute and just putting out press releases, for sure you're going to lose the general perception and public confidence very quickly, because the days of well scripted press releases to look good are gone, because people are really paying attention to the detail, not just environmental groups or people that have got a particular focus. Consumers are no longer interested in, if you like, has it got one good ingredient? They are, who is this company I'm buying for? What do they stand for? What do they believe in? And that, I think, when we look back in 20 years, will be the biggest transformation, that the consumer perception and requirement of companies is only going one way. So you better be on that escalator quick, because otherwise you'll wake up and realize the consumers have moved to other brands and companies that have organized themselves at a boardroom level and at an execution level differently than the past. And that could only be good, right? Because we do have many crises in front of us that need solving and need collective action and movement. But no, by no means are we perfect, I guess, is the way to that. You can't, sustainability and all these pillars are a never ending journey. I'm frustrated how slow some of these things move. So you can never say, oh, we're great there, let's stop there. It's constant. What comes next? How do you improve more? And if you've got that mindset, I think you're in a good place.
This theme of transparency and authenticity is clearly at the core of everything that you're doing as well. You mentioned at the beginning you're making your biggest investment to date, which is your new production plant in Rotterdam. Tell us a little bit about that, and again, the thinking around that in terms of how do I create this truly sustainable and net zero plant.
Yeah, so again, just for background, up to this point, we've broadly outsourced the sort of bottling of our products. We've always sourced all our ingredients and have control of this kind of supply chain and fruit sourcing, but we've outsourced the bottling plant. We've reached the scale and the point where actually it started with an environmental footprint issue, that too many of our partners were too away from each other and away from Rotterdam, where all our fruit arrives. And so we basically got to the point where we could massively, as part of our 2030 commitments, we could massively reduce our carbon footprint by having a site located correctly in Rotterdam, so the fruit can come off the water straight into the bottling site, blended, bottled, and straight out to manufacturers. That takes off hundreds of millions of road miles and a huge amount of CO2 at the same time, as well as being, cost effective, and at the same time as being able to then massively reduce, the carbon footprint of the actual manufacturing facility as well, compared to the ones we're using today. Because again, the advantage of a greenfield site, how do you design it in a way that you bring down that energy usage? And it looks like we'll get to 60-70% energy reduction, and then have on-site renewables, so that this is a 35,000 square meter facility. It's massive. A lot of the time we'll run off grid, and it's got a chilled warehouse in it, and it's got heat pasteurization in it, and we can do that by the way that we've thought about it. And that's mindset going into it, and some investment, as I talked about earlier, in terms of capital up front, but that improves a business case. And then having done that, we're already getting loads of people saying, what have you done? How have you done it? What can we learn? And we're like, great, here's the book. And after 6 months of running, when we work out what hasn't worked as well, because I'm sure it won't all work, we'll share that too, because we can compete in lots of other spaces, but we're not going to compete on sustainability. We're going to share. And that's the mindset. And I guess we see ourselves as the company that tries to do things first, not to then get a competitive advantage in this space, but to sort of prove what's possible and then lean back and help others, as much as we can move at the same pace, for all the reasons I talked about earlier. So we're very excited. It's actually, next week that we have first production. So we'll start to get real data, whether the blueprint is a reality, from next week.
So it's been a fantastic journey under your leadership, Douglas, to date. If I was to ask you a final question, which would be, if you look 5 years, 5 years hence, what do you see as your biggest challenge going forward when it comes to continuing to address the climate crisis? Clearly, you've done a lot to date and you will continue to do so, but what do you see as the biggest challenge and the message you would like to give to the audience today?
Yeah, everything is about pace at this point, because I think everyone's shown through a pandemic that if you have a crisis, humans are pretty good in a crisis, right? They can respond, they can act, they can get rid of all the sort of slowness and bureaucracy that exists and do great work. And I think the biggest challenge for all of us is, how do we, with this slightly nebulous thing called a climate crisis or a social justice crisis, or how do you make them genuinely feel like a crisis for everybody, so that the action and response over the next 3 to 5 years, which I think is a critical period, is the equivalent of what we've seen over the last 12 months for the pandemic. So, we haven't talked much about the Better Business Act, but, for me, one of the key things would be, how does every boardroom think people, profit and planet? And, what we're advocating for with the Better Business Act is, let's make that the default for every boardroom. It's the default for B Corps, it's the default for certain other companies, but that should be the default position for all companies, so that that's front of mind, aligned with government policy. Then they're working in unison rather than pulling against each other, and that flywheel goes faster, because it's all going to be about pace. I think the electricity grid have proved what an incredible job you can do over 10 years if you put your mind to it, and that whole transition on the electricity grid has gone way faster than anyone imagined in 2008, which is brilliant. But then there are 10 other pillars of this challenge that we need to face in the next 10 years, and it requires everybody to put their heart and soul into it and just say, I'm going to cross that gap in front of me. Yes, there are loads of unknowns, but as a leader, as a boardroom, as a leadership team, we're going to jump the gap, and we're going to think about that balance between people, profit and planet differently in our boardroom. That will accelerate change, and that's what we all need.
Well, Douglas, if ever there was a passionate leader, it's yourself, a committed leader and a committed company to accelerating on that journey, then it's Innocent. And I congratulate you and the team for what you've done to date, and wish you all the very best for the future. I think you've given a great insight into, there should be no fear here It's all about let's lean in together, let's collaborate, and let's sign up to the Better Business Act, and let's really make those changes for good. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, and thank you for the IoD support for the Better Business Act. It means a lot, and as you say, please be encouraged to sign up on the website for this movement. Thank you.
Hearing from Douglas Lamont there, it was interesting to hear that fast-moving consumer goods companies are already making steps towards change. And when I was reading the company's impact report, it's clear that they're doing much more than most. So we talked about the new production facility, energy efficiency, recyclable packaging that is also made with recycled content, and also investing in people. So a focus on making sure that the people who work for you are happy and fulfilled. And all of this is obviously important and timely. We heard from Douglas that you have to be good all round to be a good company. But it got me thinking, what if the system's not good? Is it good enough to be a good company but operating in a bad system? In the case of Innocent Drinks, they're selling a drink and a healthy lifestyle. And when we hand over our hard-earned cash to companies like this, we're agreeing to purchase the drink, not all the other bits that come with it. So things like the emissions or the plastic waste. Extended producer responsibility is a really exciting move that could see the cost of waste being moved away from our planet and back to producers. Deposit return schemes will see single-use drinks containers given a monetary value and hopefully improve collection and recycling schemes across the UK. Two really exciting policy developments, but is this enough? I would like to have heard more from Douglas about what his business looks like in a truly circular economy. Not so much linear economy with some improvements, but all of us moving into circularity. What would those big changes look like? For today's attendees, I'd like you to think about your own business or your organisation. And when you sell your product or service, what externalities do you pass on to the customer and to the planet? How could your customer access your product or service without the environment doing the heavy lifting? So instead of thinking about changing your materials within a linear economic structure, is there any potential for us to be thinking outside the bottle? Or maybe that's a new phrase for outside the box. Can we think outside single use? For business leaders, there needs to be a mindset shift here. Right now, we're encouraged to grow this continuous growth, and we heard from Catherine Trebek yesterday on this very subject. But we're not thinking about whether or not to thrive. Kate Rayworth asks us, what if we focused on thriving, whether or not we're growing? So Kate Rayworth, as I'm sure many of you know, is founder of Donut Economics, and she's asking us to be agnostic about growth. Nothing in nature grows forever. As one attendee yesterday pointed out very poetically, why can't our economies breathe like the natural world, expanding and contracting, using biomimicry as a guide to our economies that will actually work for our changing world? Douglas made some really good points about the impact of B Corp. He said it had given him the confidence to make real change, to commit to net zero targets, and to set him on a path to continuous improvement. So I'd ask us all to think about what we're doing to really be challenged. These accreditation schemes are great for putting your business under a microscope and really pushing you. As we heard, PlanetMark as well was one that I hadn't heard of. It sounds like a fascinating certification scheme. But also thinking a bit further about other kinds of challenges. So thinking about who's on your board, who does the board hear from? Are there other voices that are getting time with your board and decision makers? Has your organisation managed to get past that happy talk that David Miliband talked about yesterday? So I'm sure many of us are aware of the etymology of the word economy. It relates to household management, the original home economics. And many of us are already doing so much to get our own house in order, whether that's personally or within our professional lives and our businesses. So we're ensuring that everything's insulated, we've got energy efficiency, we're avoiding waste, and then we're proudly showing off to our neighbours how much we've achieved. But no amount of good household management can stop what's going on outside our door. So today we'll hear from speakers who hopefully challenge us to step outside, both figuratively, but I'm hoping literally as well. We need to understand just how much we could lose if we don't address climate breakdown. And that means we need to get outside to be present and active in our communities, to be aware and connected to the natural world, and to be on the streets demanding change. As Douglas said, it's no good being good on your own. It's just nice, but it doesn't solve our collective problems. And it's not someone else's problem. It's all of our responsibility.
Now, the heading of this session with you, and thanks for taking the time to spend with us, is Think Global, Engineering Solutions for a Net Zero Future. And I'm just thinking about how Wood goes about doing this globally. You know, as a leader of a global company, how do you approach this? What is your specific leadership approach?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And it's such a privilege to be partnering with yourselves for this conference. I've found the speakers to be really insightful and interesting. So yeah, thanks for this opportunity. I think for us, being global means understanding the challenges across the world and opportunities are different, particularly when we think about climate change and the race to zero. Different countries are facing different challenges. If we think about the lead up to COP, that's happening in Glasgow in November, we have a lot of the mitigation challenges in the global north, but actually a lot of the challenges around climate change right now and adapting to what's coming around climate change is happening in the global south. And so, you know, we see America taking a different approach to the European companies and countries, and then also Asia and Australia. So I think when we look globally, we have to recognize that it's not one size fits all. We need to understand how to communicate to a global workforce of 40,000 people who work all across these countries. We need to engage people in a way that's meaningful to them and not polarize the conversation. And we need to be able to contextualize what this change means for them. You know, it will be a different mix of renewables or carbon capture in different parts of the world. And as a global company and as a global leader, we need to understand, okay, what does this mean for them in that context? And how do we bring it all together in a way that makes sense for the whole company?
And, you know, Wood Group has, over the past years, I mentioned the word pivoted, moving away from, you know, advising and being embedded in the oil and gas industry and really going green from that perspective. So how, you know, what have been the challenges to your leadership in sort of really driving that green agenda, and how are you avoiding the label of greenwashing in all of this?
That's a great question. One of the things when I first started leading the energy transition it was April 2019, and we realized this was a big disruptor that was coming towards the company, and I was asked to lead this area. I realized that language is so important. And if we talk about some things being dirty and some things being clean, that's just the wrong foot to start with. So I came up with this idea of what I called a unifying concept to try and help us understand what it means to decarbonize globally. And it talked about things that anyone could get behind. One of the foundational areas was stimulating wise investment. And you know, what's the role of a board if not to help stimulate wise investment in a business? Well, also in the energy transition, we need to, as a company, we have so many technical experts, so much knowledge of all these assets. We need to help our partners channel their capital in a way that's actually better for not just their bank account, but also for the environment. Many of the people earlier in the conference were speaking about, the people, planet, profit. And we need to find a way of stimulating that as a company, as a technical engineering and consulting company. So it's been really trying to embed a different language so that people are not kind of in different camps. Trying to keep the kind of the timing being really critical as well. So how do we grow these new businesses quickly enough to kind of help offset some of the more kind of legacy businesses, and trying to understand, that's going to be a transition. It's going to be a journey. It's not going to happen in one quarter. And so we've seen a gradual growth in some of these areas that are kind of balancing out the portfolio and enable us really to be one of the very few companies that's stretching the entire spectrum right across all different assets and infrastructure. But I think also one of the other key things, Aidan, is to be proactive and to seek to take a leadership position around thought leadership. We've been doing scenario planning and understanding what the future could look like. And for us, we've really invested in trying to wrestle with some big challenges that perhaps in the past we would maybe shy away from. And so I think there's been a cultural change in Wood, and we've been much more on the front foot, much more curious and engaging with some of these massive questions that the world's wrestling with. So for us, it's a whole suite of different initiatives and ideas that we're working on.
I should have mentioned at the beginning to our audience that if they do want to ask you questions live, I do have my tablet here to capture these. So please feel free to put down some questions as we go through this discussion. You talked about this journey, Martyn, and I'm thinking here also about the accountability levels in terms of the accountability level in the board, and I'm guessing the tone from the top and how that permeates across the whole organisation. I mean, who do you consider you're accountable to in this journey?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think one of the things that I've been quite conscious of through this entire journey is the current set of stakeholders. So you could say, the shareholders, the staff, the communities that we work in, the investors, and employees. There's that kind of mix of stakeholders. But one of the things I've really been conscious of is how do we get into our minds that the future shareholders of our company are as important as the current shareholders? Maybe that's a controversial thing to say, I don't know. But, in some ways we need to see as stewarding the care of a company. Many of your panelists and attendees are on boards of various organizations. It's the role of a steward to make sure that organization actually is better when you leave it than when you started being involved. And if we take that to the next step, surely if we do that in generational ways, we should see actually our children eventually taking these roles and their children's children. And I think that's part of my mindset of how do we have a 15, 20-year mindset so that we're not just thinking about the short term as you were just talking about with the panel, but actually we're seeing the future stakeholders as important as the current ones. It's quite a challenge, I think, particularly when we're so geared around financial metrics. I think the other thing about accountability is, it should come from the board. I think for a lot of these things, the executive leadership team lead the company, and the board hold them accountable for their direction and their decisions. And we certainly have new ways of working that we're finding out. How do we build this accountability? And if I take one example, which is very timely, we were the first company. It's in the press this week, I think, to receive the UK Export Finance Transition Export Development Guarantee of £430 million. And we're really pleased to be the first company to be receiving this kind of support. And I think one of the things in there is what's our trajectory for our energy transition and sustainable infrastructure businesses, and how do we hold ourselves accountable to the trajectory that we've said that we're going on. And I think this is a new area for companies, particularly around profit. How do we change our portfolio and ensure that we're not, changing back to old ways when the market conditions change, but actually we're committed and disciplined to see through our plans And I think, partnering with the government on this is a really positive step. And I think it's one that a lot of other companies should look at and should think, actually, this is a way to help drive positive change across the business.
And do you see, you talked about this new loan and this new dynamic, but taking this sense of stewardship, which I absolutely love, because I think that is a real mindset that we want to get all board members into. But taking that loan, how are you going to steward that, as you see, over the next 5 years in terms of the kind of investments that you're going to be able to make that you wouldn't otherwise have done?
That's a great question. And I've actually been writing a paper on that very question, because one of the things that we need to understand is, obviously markets change. And as a supply chain company, a big contractor, we don't have our own, portfolio of assets that we can just decide what to do with them, or, a huge capital spend that we can divvy up differently. We actually win contract by contract. And that's how we survive. And I think for us, it's a challenge of the kind of work we choose to do, the kind of customers that we choose to work for, and over time we can manage to change direction by working in different areas for different customers, but still keeping our traditional customers happy. And so I think the stewarding of this loan, I've actually, as I say, written a paper which is under discussion, and it's a bit of a step into the unknown for the company to try and figure out how do we build this kind of rigor between, okay, what the market's doing, what our internal businesses are doing, and then what are our aspirations to grow. And that creates, I think, a healthy level of tension within the company that's really positive for helping us to do the right thing. And I think that tension actually is part of the answer to some of the other things that we've been talking about previously around the climate change emergency, and how do we embed that in our companies? How do we embed that sense of urgency and pace that your previous speaker, Douglas Lamont, was speaking about? I think you can't embed pace without some degree of tension. You need to have some, almost like residual tension that keeps you coming back to, okay, well, this is what we've said we were going to do. And, it could be through a number of different avenues over the next few years. But I think the encouraging thing is that we've set that as a bit of a North Star to say, this is the direction we're going in and we're committed to it. And we'll utilize all the various levers that Wood normally does to get us along that trajectory. But yeah, this is a really significant moment for us.
So again, love this. Set the North Star and really go for it at pace. And we've heard a lot over the last day and a half about how pace is going to matter. Now, you're a very large global employer, over 40,000 employees in the organisation. Going at that pace has its challenges for your workforce in terms of the skill sets that you're going to need in the future. So what are you doing to help to transition the workforce at pace? And what do you think that model looks like going forward? And how are you going to engage with your employees to make sure they're on that journey with you?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question as well, Aidan. I think it's actually really timely. I was at a conference, my first face-to-face conference this week in Birmingham. I just got back last night. It was on carbon capture and hydrogen and decarbonisation. And I was on a panel discussion around finance, and the one after me, the panel discussion was on skills and workforce, and just the question you're asking. And I was talking to Chris Claydon, the Chief Exec of ECITB, Energy Construction Industry Training Board, about this very question of how do we support companies like Wood, but also the wider industry to transition. And we were talking about a few ideas. And I mean, one thing I would really like to highlight is schemes like the ECITB's Train to Retain kind of initiative. And what this does is it takes people who are kind of early to mid-career level and gives them an opportunity to their costs to be covered as they, if you like, dip their toe in a new part of the industry. So I've actually utilised in the last 2 years the two different groups within Train to Retain, within the work that I'm doing. So directly to help myself in the energy transition, and also one of my team who leads on sustainable infrastructure. And we've taken a small group of these kind of very enthusiastic, very capable young people, and we've kind of put them in a totally new area, and they're absolutely thriving. And it's so exciting to see how this has really energized them in their career. And I think there was one lady, I think she's in her 20s, and she was saying this is the best thing she's ever done. And it's so enthused her about the company and about what we're trying to do. And we're actually, embedding her and one of my colleagues in the Race to Resilience. The kind of the twin arm to Race to Zero is the Race to Resilience, and Wood is now the business interface for companies who want to engage with the Race to Resilience. And we've used things like Train to Retain to help us find and free up people to put them into these initiatives. So I think for us, this is a small, small initiative, but it shows that actually what's possible. And one of our ambitions is really to kind of scale this up and do it more widely through things like an Energy Transition Academy, where we would invest in people as they seek to learn new skills and transition to new industries. And I think that is going to be one of the focuses over the next few years.
I love this idea of getting those early adopters who are embracing that change and getting them to act as ambassadors across the organisation to get that message out that this is not something to be feared, but something to be embraced. And that retraining is actually a positive. It's a challenge, of course. It's a challenge in uncertain times, but a real positive. So I love that message that you're getting across. Now, Wood has a great reputation for innovation. And, we've heard from other speakers how we'll need to find solutions faster if we're to avert the climate disaster. Now, how does the board at Wood see its role in bringing solutions to the market while still being under pressure as a public company to ensure good shareholder returns? And where does long-term planning fit into this paradox?
Yeah, so this is a really key issue. I think one of the things that I've been involved in directly is helping the board think about the longer term. So back in 2019, we did 2 scenario reports, and this was the first time we'd done scenario planning within Wood. And so myself and a small team helped the business go through these 2 intuitive logic, the process is called, utilizing some of the methodology that was developed in Shell. And we looked 15 years into the future, and we said, how could the energy industry change over the next 15 years? And we did the same for the urban environment, urban infrastructure. And then I had the chance to brief the board on the reports. And I think one of the things that you touched on, Aidan, which is really important, is helping, give a bit of space and time to think longer term. And your previous panelist was talking about a Friday afternoon, and I think that's a great idea. I think that's exactly what we did with the board. We got some time with them and said, okay, let's not just talk about the here and now, let's think 15 years into the future. And one of the things I noticed as I took them through this journey was, whenever you're talking about so far into the future, obviously none of us knows. I mean, we didn't know about COVID at that point. So, everything's changed, you could say, since then. But the conversations that we had were so rich, and the principles that came out are absolutely relevant. And I would say even more relevant now that we're in and we're kind of going through COVID, because people start to think about the kind of world they want. And they if for a few minutes, I would almost say they kind of take off their board hat and put on their private citizen hat and talk about, well, that's not the world I want to see, or it'd be great if this happened. And you're not talking about the latest financial performance. You're talking about a world, for example, where you might think, how much personal data are people willing to share? And that was one of the features of the scenario report we really looked at in depth, was what would encourage or unlock people releasing more of their personal data as we go towards a more digital world. And then, we discussed that with the board, and then lo and behold, COVID hits, and all of a sudden we're sharing track and trace in coffee shops every 5 minutes, and we're sharing unbelievable amounts of personal data. And I think those are the kind of things where that long-term planning, seeding some of those questions with the board in a non kind of let's say emotive or challenging way, you can actually throw up some really constructive conversations, and then that then helps you to say, okay, well, if this is the world that could happen, what future do we want to create? And I think for us, being a force for good is such an important part of who Wood is. And I think what we realized through this journey was we don't just want to sit back and say, well, let's hope the future turns out okay, and we don't really care which scenario works out. Because actually, when you look at the different scenarios, some of them are very destructive for the planet. My philosophy is nobody wins in a 3-degree world, temperature rise world. That's not a winner for any corporate strategy in my book. And so you have to say, well, actually, what's our role in changing the future or influencing the future? And so I think that balance of the present performance and health of the company with the future long-term direction, I would really advocate to other companies things like scenario planning to really help you. In a football analogy, I would say put your foot on the ball, look up, and see what's coming towards you. And I think for many of us, COVID has been the wake-up call that actually, we probably weren't thinking about global pandemics in our risk register enough. But now, it's shown us the world is so interconnected. We need to understand these things much better and invest the time on the board agenda to really deal with these things in a bit more detail.
So, Martyn, we've got time for one more question, and I'll just pull this off. And how do we avoid polarizing communities in this journey? And how will you, I'm just saying Wood Group, how will you ensure collaboration becomes the central word here? So how do you go about that?
Yeah, I've been speaking for a while now about this kind of need for a global citizen mindset. I think, what we've learned from past transitions is, we need to avoid stranded communities. And it's not just about stranded assets, it's about stranded communities that have got deep scarring from previous, what you might call disorderly transitions. And I'm sure many examples spring to mind for people in the UK and overseas. And when you look at, the world now, there's a real need for people who can communicate the future in a compelling way. I follow a few futurists, and one of them I was reading was saying basically, one of our biggest challenges is that we can't articulate the future that we want. And if we can't articulate it, how then can we bring it about? And so it may seem a small thing, but I've been trying to use storytelling actually as a way to engage people and paint that picture. If I just give you one quick example, the IPPR and Economic European Justice Commission set up 4 or 5 think tanks around the UK over the last few months. And I was involved in the Aberdeenshire one, which took 22 members of the public, and they asked a number of us to come in and speak to them about different industries and the challenges with the transition. And that was a real eye-opener for me. It was the first time I'd really spoken in depth to members of the public through my role. And it really helped me to say, to challenge, how do I communicate in a way that's gripping for the public, not just for business leaders. And so in the end, I actually shared a story. I wrote a story about somebody who is just born in 2017 and is 18 in 2035. And this imaginary young guy, I called him Stuart from Stonehaven. And I painted the picture of his life as he grows up, being a teenager, and what the future could hold in Aberdeenshire as we transition into what the energy transition holds for Aberdeenshire. And that really captured people's imagination. And I think, part of it is telling the story so that people can say, oh yeah, I see my role and I see that actually companies are trying to be a force for good. They're trying to show the way. They're trying to generate, this kind of green economy and build that better. They're trying, and I think if we can capture the people's imaginations as well, and really just give them a vision for a different future, I really feel that's a way to bring people on board with what we're trying to do, rather than just talk about the latest sales figures or profit margins or whatever. I think we need to win people's hearts and minds, and I think storytelling is a great way to capture people's hearts and share emotions about the future in a positive way.
Promoting good governance is a fundamental part of IoD's mission. Accountability is central to good governance and is key to enhancing public confidence. Now, our second of 3 panel reflections considers the core provocation. What more do we need to do to hold ourselves accountable to the next generation? Climate change is happening, and we owe it to our children and future generations to act now. Doing nothing is not an option. But is society quicker to apportion blame rather than accept responsibility? I'll be exploring with our speakers the question of trust. As leaders, can we be trusted? How do we engender that trust? What does this look like? And what is the board's role in preparing for a net zero industry 4.0? Now, we have an excellent group of contributors to discuss and debate this further, and I'm delighted to make some introductions. First off, Tony Wines, founder of Turnkey, who's over 25 years experience managing large regional and global networks, and is one of the leading software providers in sustainability, with particular emphasis on ESG and risk management. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you very much.
Jill Farrell is Director of Customer Engagement and Communications at Zero Waste Scotland, and very much focused on the circular economy. And she's been involved in strategic projects, including the location of the Green Investment Bank headquarters and the Dundee Waterfront Development Project. Welcome, Jill.
Hi, Aidan. Thanks for having me.
And Professor David Hillier, Associate Principal at University of Strathclyde and Executive Dean of Strathclyde Business School. This centre's work is recognised for supporting firms through innovation, entrepreneurship, internationalisation and leadership. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Aidan. Good to be here.
And as co-founder of Stop Ecocide, Jojo Mehta is calling for ecocide to be made an international crime in order to put an end to mass environmentally destructive activities on the planet. Welcome, Jojo.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Now, our speakers will each present before we open up for a group discussion. So let me start first with you, Tony. And what are your thoughts on 2 issues? The need for organisations to address ESG and the importance of transparency in sustainability data so that people have confidence in what they're reporting.
Thank you very much. 2 great questions. Firstly, looking at organisations needs to embrace sustainability. I think we've been lucky enough to see quite a significant shift in certainly recent years from organisations who I think looked at ESG as an issue that they were looking to address or trying to understand to a call to action. So we're very fortunate to see that this whole process is moving in the right direction. The need really, I think, is twofold. At the moment, we still see a lot of organizations understanding that ESG is critical to their business, but there's some concern as to how to go about practicing ESG in the best possible way. So as an organization, we're approaching this from a data angle, but also from an advisory angle to help organizations in many ways just start their ESG journey. And many organizations, I think, need to understand the roadmap as to how to get the best benefits of ESG within their organization, to allow transparency to unfold in the best possible way. If we don't get that part of it right at the beginning, then I think the transparency fails in many ways. So we're working very hard to help organizations address what are the best approaches based on your market sector, based on your strategy, based on your culture. And then from there, addressing the need to be transparent. From the transparency side, definitely ESG transparency requires more work in terms of being able to look at ESG almost in the same way as we see financial reporting today. Whereas organizations look at their financial reporting on a monthly basis, they address certain issues within the company. At Turnkey, we use that same process to try and address ESG. We're getting organizations to measure energy, water, waste, and other elements of their business on a monthly basis to really marry this into the whole structure from a financial and non-financial basis and integrate ESG into the overall strategy of the business. So when we see this operating effectively, it's really quite astounding what organizations are able to do, because they move away from this concept that ESG is costly and secondly can be very much around a compliance regulation to something that's much more addressable in terms of productivity benefits, cultural improvement, scalability from the organization to be able to showcase their improvements with real transparency around their data, which means that they can avoid any thoughts of greenwashing. And I think that's absolutely key. If we can showcase information as transparent in real time as possible, tie it into the strategy of the business, the greenwashing issue that I think many people feel concerned about can tend to go away. And that's really where we believe this is the greatest opportunity to create the impact, is to see this as really a benefit. And I think you mentioned it earlier on, some sort of profit-based structure, which helps organizations as opposed to a pure necessity. But it does require, I think, a lot of thinking around what's the best approach, because we know that there's a complexity around ESG. There's many frameworks, there's many structures, there's many ways that ESG can be adopted. And how do we demystify that and ensure that companies have a nice, smooth roadmap to address this in the best possible way?
So what I hear from you is by putting ESG at the heart of reporting, this can be an opportunity rather than a cost, and can help to create much greater transparency in what we're doing. And data will be key to that as well. Thanks. Jill, can I come to you next? In the context of achieving net zero, can you explore how good governance has the capacity to promote collaboration between board, staff, and key stakeholders? And what do you see are the barriers to that?
So when we talk about the circular economy, just taking a step back, what we're talking about there is the current economic system, which is focused on growth, and sustainability of resources are two areas that are not easily reconciled. So what we promote with the circular economy is a new approach to our economic model, a change to the old linear take, make, dispose model to circular strategies that maximize return on carbon investment in all resources. And that's what we mean by the circular economy. And it's underpinned by decoupling consumption from economic growth and developing different ways of measuring environmental, societal and economic success. And as Tony was saying earlier about ESG, that requires a level of transparency and a level of clarity in terms of what you're measuring and what you're reporting. Large public companies have a real opportunity to cut their carbon emissions from their supply chain, their operations, products and services. And that will help them not only to meet ESG goals, but to grow their customer base, which sets an example for their supply chains and the wider business environment. And what we've been doing, working with companies to put the circular economy into practice, has helped us learn a few things. This approach needs new skills and new thinking, particularly around design and critical thinking. Products and services need to be reconsidered to design in ways to maximize resources. So ensuring that products can be easily reused, can be easily upgraded, easily maintained, and as a last resort, easily recycled. We need to consider approaches such as leasing. So there's companies that will lease you jeans for as long as you want them, take them back and repurpose them. Tools, how many people have got a power tool in the cupboard that they use once a year? To get the best carbon return for those tools, you would just lease one when you need it and take it back, and then someone else can be using it. And the same applies for capital equipment for businesses. We're doing a lot of rethinking around service provision. So Schiphol Airport in Phillips is a famous example where Schiphol Airport really wants light, not light bulbs. And they now have a partnership where Phillips contract to provide a certain amount of light to Schiphol Airport, and how that is provided is not Schiphol Airport's concern in terms of light bulbs maintenance, etc. And lastly, rethinking about wasted assets. So we've been working on the deposit return scheme for Scotland, which is not an innovative scheme. It exists in 40 odd jurisdictions around the world, but it sets behaviour change by making people view an item such as a can, a bottle, or a plastic bottle as an asset which has a value attached to it, and when you dispose of that asset, you get money back instead of just throwing it away. So how does that relate to the board? I think it's true to say that all stakeholders are watching in terms of companies' approaches to the environment, their approaches to societal good if possible, and governance. Investors have demonstrated, consistent research shows that businesses with superior ESG scores report increased financial performance and outperform the stock market. So, why would investors not be interested in businesses with excellent ESG scores? And consumers, from packaging to palm oil, consumers are making their views well known on social media, as well as affecting their own spending habits. They're starting to influence others. So being very aware, very clear, very authentic with consumers about what your ambitions are and what you're doing to redress some of your particularly environmental impacts is increasingly important. As Jojo will know better than anyone, governments, the pendulum is swinging towards regulation around things like ESG. That would certainly help to provide some consistency, and other initiatives such as extended producer responsibility, where if you make a product, you're responsible for it throughout its life cycle, including disposal, starts to drive companies thinking differently about how those products are designed. Employees are certainly very interested in wanting to work for companies with ambitious ESG plans. I mean, as a business, we certainly see a massive increase in the number of applications we get for every job that we advertise because of our mission. And PwC did some research earlier this year that identified that 86% of employees want to work for companies with ambitious ESG plans. That translates into the board and the non-execs needing the skills to be able to drive true environmental improvements within a business. I'm sure David will attest that executive education demand for sustainable development, sustainable growth, sustainable strategies has grown exponentially across the world. And again, investors want to invest in the top teams, and that top team needs to demonstrate that they've got the skills to manage environmental impacts in what is an incredibly fast-paced environment. I don't think it matters how you measure environmental impact. I think having consistent data, being transparent, as Tony said earlier, and being authentic is really important. Companies need to adopt these circular strategies to make sure that we design in sustainable consumption and production. Large companies can lead by example by setting challenging targets, working with their supply chain, and engaging with all of these stakeholders, investors, customers, governments, employees, help to co-create different solutions. As a business, Zero Waste Scotland, during the pandemic, or the worst of the lockdowns in the pandemic, we were doing some work to understand the carbon impact of working from home. And as a consequence of demonstrating the reduction in carbon for people who are non-passive commuters to the office, we put out an offer to our colleagues to become permanent home workers, and over 90% of them have taken up that offer. It doesn't mean to say they'll never go to a meeting, they'll never meet another colleague, but it does mean that we're reducing our carbon footprint as a service company by ensuring that colleagues have the opportunity to work from home as much as possible. And there's obviously social and some professional development benefits from being in an office with other people, and we need to work harder as a business to try and address those.
So, Jill,
but by making that commitment to the environment, we drive that through partnerships and through consultation with all of our stakeholders. We've got the tools and the knowledge to do better. I think what we all need is more focus and greater pace.
Yeah, so Jill, I'll come to David next, but I'll take from what you're saying just some of the key points around if we really do learn to be more circular in our thinking in terms of the reuse, the leasing model, the rental models. I can see that being a real opportunity for business again to grasp. At the same time, getting the board onto the front foot on this as opposed to the back foot. We'll maybe come on and talk a little bit more about regulation and the role that regulation has to play as well. But this whole idea of getting the board out in front, onto the front foot. We heard earlier in a previous interview with Douglas Lamont at Innocent, just how transparency and really turning this into, I'll call it a virtue, that can effectively permeate the whole company ethos, the way that employees feel about working, the way in which things move, will be very much true. So we'll come back and explore that further. Could I turn now to David? You know, building on what Tony and Jill have said, can you describe how ESG criteria can be used to generate the long-term competitive financial returns, as well as having that societal impact that we've been talking about? I mean, how do we do that? And where do you see boards that are falling short of that, and what should they be doing?
No, thanks, Aidan. It's probably one of the most important points that you can ask about any sustainable business strategy, is that how do you integrate it so that companies will follow these principles, not only in the good times, but also in the bad times. During a crisis, you tend to see that the profit maximization becomes all dominant, and the people in the planet aspect to more sustainable business practices tends to take a back seat, and that is natural. So our task as a society is to ensure that the board does embed and integrate sustainability and ESG principles into their thinking. There's two main avenues in which you can do that. You can say it's one's internal and the other is external. Now, if you think about internal first, there is a framework called the triple bottom line that companies can follow, and that is, in addition to maximising the profit bottom line, you're also maximising value through the way you engage with your people and the way that you engage with the planet and society. How then does that then get captured in decisions? Well, I think the best way to do that is to tie KPIs linked to those three areas to executive compensation. That not only are you taking measures based on how well the company's performed financially, but also in terms of more supply chain issues, reducing carbon emissions. The data that Tony's company is actually provides, I think that's necessary. And then to link that to the compensation of directors. That is an internal approach, but then we can actually think about external. Jojo, regulation is already coming in, and that will ensure that companies will stay on the right side of the environmental and societal performance and operating practices, but also through the investors as well, through socially responsible investing. And again, you can break that into two main types. There's the passive socially responsible investing, where investment funds will basically screen out and screen in companies that meet criteria that those funds are saying that they want to invest in. And then there's the more active approach, which my research has found to be most effective, and that is we call impact investing, where not only do you choose companies that you think are going to provide a strong financial return, but you then become activists. You engage with the directors and the board and help the directors and the board make decisions that will encourage sustainability objectives. By combining both the internal and the external approaches, I believe that gives us the best chance to integrate sustainability into corporate strategy. And I think that will improve corporate decisions and corporate value, not only in the good times, but also during crisis periods like we're facing just now.
So, David, I pick up from this in terms of there's a lot of mechanisms already there. And the triple bottom line reporting is a good example of that. But I'm also taking from this in terms of the role of what I'll call the impact investment lens, coupled with what Tony and Jill have already laid out, is again the proper lens to be looking through in the future, and potentially maybe the necessary lens to look at through the future in order to gauge how a company's impact is, not just on the planet, on society, but also at the same time ensuring that it remains profitable in doing so. Yeah. So thank you for that. Jojo, now, how close do you think you are to Ecocide being made an international crime? Now, there seems to be a groundswell of support, just as David mentioned, for this campaign across countries and across generations. If it comes into law, it would be hugely significant, as it puts those individuals responsible for decisions or acts that lead to severe environmental harm actually being liable to potential criminal prosecution, not just fines. So please tell us a bit about your work, the obstacles and maybe some observations so far, and how do we change the mindsets so that good governance is prioritized over short-term profit, or dare I say it, even greed?
Thanks ever so much. Yeah, this is the core question, of course, around this. And I think perhaps a good way to introduce this would be to just look at a situation last year where Joe Kaiser, who was then CEO of Siemens, was challenged over provision of equipment for the Adani coal mine in Australia on environmental grounds. And his response was regretful. He said, while I do have a lot of empathy for environmental matters, I do need to balance different interests of different stakeholders, as long as they have lawful legitimation for what they do. And this is the key thing. This lawful legitimation is what enables the continuing destruction of ecosystems, which is a root cause of our current climate and ecological crisis. And it means that with all the goodwill and ambition in the world, we're still only crawling, really, in the direction we should be sprinting in. So we're simply trying to play our familiar game better. And it's now becoming obvious that it's an incredibly dangerous game. So essentially, we're dancing with fiduciary duty at the edge of a precipice without a guardrail. So what if we change the rules of the game and actually put that guardrail in place? What if instead of dancing at the very dangerous edge, we recoiled from it in a healthy way, as we do from mass murder? This is what an international crime of ecocide can do, and what Stop Ecocide International is working towards. So changing the norm and deterring the harmful practices by creating the necessary parameter. So it's about creating a new and a healthy taboo, if you like, in the form of personal criminal responsibility for key decision makers. And as of June this year, there's a legal definition of ecocide, which I can tell Aidan that you've read, drafted by a panel of top international and criminal lawyers from around the world and convened by our foundation. The core text is just one sentence. Ecocide means unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. It's simple and clear. It's based strongly on legal precedent, and it addresses the worst harms while also taking account of and reinforcing existing laws that may vary from one jurisdiction to another. So we all know, and that's why we're here today, we all know that profound change is needed if we're to emerge from this crisis, not unscathed because it's already too late for that, but with a fighting chance of surviving and thriving. which is probably why 14 member states of the International Criminal Court are already publicly talking about ecocide law at government or parliamentary level, with more contacting us behind closed doors. So as you can see, this is a conversation that is already in progress. Insurance executives and political advisors are already telling us that they know this is coming. And we estimate, to answer your question about a time span, we estimate it could be being ratified by states within the next 4 to 5 years. So this law is not about examining, how many toxins can we use without breaching regulations, for example. It's about genuinely leveling the playing field, protecting life, and empowering practical and positive change. So we like to think of it as a kind of long overdue health and safety law for the planet, if you will. And our collective work is now to welcome it for the lifeline it quite literally offers. And every person watching or listening to this has the most extraordinary resource at their fingertips, the expertise and imagination of everyone that works for them and with them. A close colleague of mine recently asked her brother, let's call him Fred, who works in serious, really big energy infrastructure projects. And his response was a series of very specific questions. How will this affect this aspect of what I do? What about the budget for that? How will the lads feel about that? All incredibly useful and precise questions, and exactly what needs to be being asked. That expertise and that knowledge needs to be called upon across all sectors. And much of what we need is currently available already. Renewable energy, circular economy, as Jill was describing, regenerative agriculture. So now it's time to prepare for a law that will actually support these solutions, and many more besides, and to do it in consultation in all of our industries. In a few short years, I believe the Mr. Kaysers of this world may be able to answer differently, and hopefully we'll feel a lot better for it. Thanks.
And Jojo, what I take from this is that this is coming. The movement is gathering pace internationally, globally. And once again, I'll keep saying, the better we get in front of this, rather than simply waiting for things to happen. I think the experience of business is that if they simply wait for things to happen, bad things happen, as in we get bad legislation, we get stick rather than carrot, we get issues then which really do disrupt the way in which corporates and business work. So I see this as an issue that we get out in front of, that we embrace, and we put it into this context of ESG, we put it into this context of the circular economy, we put it into this context of impact investing as a key point. So what I pick up from that is the need for us to really focus on what I'll call the relevant skill sets, and to really invest in those skill sets and accelerate those skill sets as fast as we possibly can. We've heard from our other contributors that if we get out in front of this, then there's a great opportunity to deploy the new workforce, the 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, whatever you want to describe it as, making that relevant, but also making it exciting, enjoyable, and really worthwhile in terms of activities. So really an exciting message for this next generation. Nothing to be feared, but everything to be gained. So thank you for that. Now, let me open it up a little with a couple of points. And maybe, again, just coming to this dynamic, or this dilemma of the potential for regulation to be introduced to force behaviour. And Tony, maybe come back to you in the first instance. When we think about reporting, that there's been a history of regulatory interventions to force companies to report in a particular way. And no doubt that's going to continue in some shape or form. So what advice would you have to be it small companies, be it large companies, in terms of how they should be embracing this type of reporting now and embed it into their DNA?
The way we see regulatory reporting is, of course, it's absolutely essential, and it's been a good direction for the industry to help, I think, move everyone in the right way. We've worked a lot in Europe and in Asia, and Asia has now become quite a regulated society, and that actually helps a lot of organizations think about ESG a lot quicker than perhaps they may have done in the past. So I can no doubt agree that the regulatory side adds tremendous benefit. But it only, I think, helps us to get organizations to move in the right direction. We're trying to look at it from a slightly different perspective, that the regulation and the reporting is a good way to start the process, but it's not by any means the end of the process. It's merely the beginning of the journey. So we're trying to really use these regulatory frameworks, these regulatory bodies, to help companies to put together the what we would always describe as the baseline of what that organization's capabilities are, and then use the analytics that we can produce and use the structures that we have to drive the strategy. And I think that's where we really get the benefit from the regulatory bodies. If we can help organizations to see this as a means of adopting better practices, improving the brand of the company with really distinct ESG data that you can proudly show to the world without any concept of greenwashing or mitigating any of the areas where you think it could be a little bit difficult to report on. Working with organizations who perhaps even started with us quite resistantly and negatively, when they start to see even some of the basics of regulatory reporting leading to something beneficial into the company. It could be a reduction in carbon footprint. It could be a reduction in cost of energy. It could be better retentivity of staff. It could be more consumers actually going to their brand because their reporting is so strong and accurate and watertight. That's a massive plus. And that's why I believe there has to be this combination of regulatory frameworks and improving the regulatory side of it, but at the same time using that as the means to really improve the processes of the company, which they ultimately will get the gain from all sides. And that, I think, is where we continue to really plug and push organizations to see it not just from the regulation side. We see it as a very important piece, but not the end goal. And that's what we see the best benefits from when companies do this well.
And Joe, you've been spending a lot of time showing the business how it's worthwhile doing this in terms of by coming up with innovative ideas and showing how to create that, I'll call it that circular way of thinking, that supply chain way of thinking in terms of reuse. Now, obviously, how well has that message resonated with the businesses that you've been connecting with, and what do you think we need to do to make that the not just the sensible thing to do, but we make it the natural thing to be doing?
Yeah, I mean, as Tony says, there's some companies come willingly to the party and have got their own ideas and their own ambitions, and are maybe motivated by the founder or the senior staff's dedication. Others are coming because of competitive threat. They're seeing that either the resources that they depend on are drying up or becoming way more expensive, or that their customers are saying, actually, we recognize that what you're doing is not good for the planet or not good for society, and we're no longer good to be buying from you. Thanks very much. I mean, one of the most important things that touches on what David was saying earlier about the internal drivers is that companies develop a vision about where they want to get to. So your ESG is reporting your journey towards that vision, but you need a vision about where your business is going to be, what the values are that underpin that, and what behaviours your board, your exec team demonstrate that are then driven through the whole business and are evident in the sales team, the procurement team, customer services, the whole shebang. And the work that we do with businesses is predominantly SMEs at the moment, but some of them have transformed their business models. They're seeing increased financial strength, positioning. They're seeing competitive advantage through adopting circular strategies and looking across the piece at their ESG. I mean, things like diversity and inclusion cannot be underestimated in terms of the robustness that having a truly diverse and inclusive workforce. The robustness that brings to thinking, to developing strategy, to exploring different options, it is unsurpassed, and it's something that we're working very hard at in Zero Waste Scotland to increase our diversity and inclusion, and make sure that we're maximising the the creative thinking, the design thinking, the systems thinking that's absolutely crucial to the circular economy. But behaviours, values of that board and non-exec team is just, you can't underestimate the impact that that has. It's no longer tokenism, it's actually being committed and being authentic.
Yeah, and David, when we talk about the impact that can be made, and I'm thinking here also in terms of the role that public sector has to play in this, not just private sector, because clearly, public sector can be a large part of a circular economy as well. How do we get this message across? It's not just about, let's say, private equity and others looking at impact investment and returns on capital, but it's about how we as a society actually look at how the organisations, including public sector organisations, run.
So the investment community as younger people are getting more and more involved in investment, then we know that younger people are much more concerned about the society and the climate, and that will in itself, that momentum of societal change in terms of the investment community, I think will actually have an impact over the longer term in terms of just those companies that are more sustainable, that have more green objectives. They will attract more investment, and that will then increase their value. But in terms of the public sector, well, the public sector in a sense is it's made up of lots of different bodies, and when we think about the three components to the triple bottom line, well, the profit component is no longer the big driver. It's, we want to, in the public sector, improve society. And so therefore, it's much easier to think about embedding our ESG objectives into that public sector than it would be in the private sector. And then that comes into, what Frank is saying through the education as well, that as a society wants to know more about sustainable business practices, business strategies, then the public sector will respond to that, particularly through the university sector or the further education sector, and also in the schools as well. So I think that as, if you think about the public sector being a reflection on society and what society wants, then I'm positive that we will see a continual change going forward. We deal with students in the university, that's our job, it's our raison d'etre, and our students are saying we want sustainability, we want ESG to be the forefront of all areas of the university sector, whether that's in business or it's engineering or science or even in humanities. These principles have to embed all the way in which we deliver our education. So I'm confident we'll see change. I think the public sector probably will be faster than the private sector, but through regulation, through investors wanting that change, and as Jill is saying, an internal desire to companies to make a difference, to improve what they're doing with respect to the planet and with respect to society. I'm confident that we will see over the longer term a definite move towards these practices.
And Jojo, if I can come to you on, this sounds encouraging, but at the same time there'll be a question: is that enough, and is it fast enough to satisfy where we need to get to in order to address the fundamental concerns on climate crisis? And it's probably more of this question of where does the stick operate better than the carrot? And I'm thinking from a micro example of a local authority taxing its council taxpayers for being wasteful, whether that is bin collections and various other things, to what you're doing at the very front end, which is to drive this issue of ecocide as a fundamental and punishable offence. So where do we get this balance in order to create momentum?
I think that there's a couple of important factors here. One is time, in the sense that, well, there's two aspects of that. One is that we know we don't have a huge amount of time to cause really serious shifts. And I would say that, you know, all of the positive things that have been discussed in this panel are absolutely essential, but not sufficient for creating that change. And hence the approaching of a sort of ground rule at the sort of criminal level, at the highest level, can be very important. But the other side of that time factor is it also needs industry needs to have time, and government needs to have time to adapt to that, because what you're looking at is a fundamental ground rule being changed. So instead of your, you know, fiduciary duty being, you know, sort of maximization of shareholder return, you know, within which has to be within the bounds of criminal law. Obviously, you can't go and get a permit to kill people for your new business, for example. But adding a new rule there to say that not only can you not get a permit for something that's going to kill people, but you can't get a permit for something that's going to severely destroy the environment. You've actually got a new rule entering in there, and you need time for that to, you know, for the economy and for governments to approach that. And that's one of the reasons that we aim for this to happen at the top level, at the International Criminal Court, because obviously we aim for a rule that will apply across borders, which is very important with serious environmental offences, because, you know, they can be created by companies that have the ability to sort of hop jurisdictions, if you like. That's one aspect. But another is the fact that, of course, you need the support of a lot of states to get behind this, and that takes time. And so having that as something that is visible and coming over the horizon, if you like, creates that period, almost a sort of a grace period, during which we all have the opportunity to start adjusting to this, you know, to this new parameter. And it coming back to the sort of, you know, the educational side, and sort of looking at what's happening in schools, but also, you know, the sort of internal impetus within industry, the sort of positive side of moving towards this. I mean, I'd love to see something in place, like, for example, Friday afternoon think tanks, where everybody across industry and education and everywhere takes Friday afternoon to actually address, with their particular expertise in their particular industry, how do we actually approach this? Because this is an existential global challenge, and an afternoon a week seems like a cheap price and a very effective tapping into an incredible resource, you know, as one potential way of accessing the approaches to those solutions.
And I think that's probably a great message to wrap this up around. If we think innovatively and give ourselves the space to think innovatively alongside doing what we've been discussing, really putting ESG at the heart. And that's for every size of business, putting ESG at the heart in terms from a reporting perspective, looking closely at the way in which we are managing our activities from a wasteful perspective, such that we start to create that circular economy type thinking, that supply chain, what Jill has been saying, and then really getting the investment community as well behind this, almost holding companies to account for operating in an ethical, environmentally responsible way, not just in ESG reporting, but I love the idea also of getting CEOs and boards remunerated differently than simply short-term shareholder return. And if that changes alongside what you're suggesting, I think we've got a great route forward to show that this is opportunity, and to embrace that opportunity in a transparent and fulsome way. And I think that's where regulation needs to support that activity as well. So listen, to all of you, thank you so much for your contributions. And I think this fits very, very nicely into our whole drive around what good governance looks like in practice. It's not good words, it's good actions. And that's what we need to be focused on going forward. So thank you very much, all of you.